It is Columbus Day. Longtime listeners of this show will know that it is a tradition on Columbus Day for me to carve out a section of the show to talk about the holiday and why it deserves to be celebrated, despite what the leftist crybabies and historical revisionists might say. And I will continue with this tradition for as long as the holiday and the man it commemorates remain under attack, which means that I will continue it indefinitely. Now, if you hear Columbus acknowledged at all today in the media or by any political or cultural figure of note, it will almost certainly be a condemnation. They will tell us that the same thing they've been telling us for many years, that Columbus was a genocidal maniac whose arrival led to the alleged genocide of so-called Native Americans or quote-unquote indigenous people. In the same breath, without a hint of irony, they will also decry what they describe as overly simplistic portrayals of Columbus and his voyages, hoping you don't notice how no portrayal of Columbus is as absurdly and cartoonishly simplistic as the one you get from these very same people. Now, as mentioned, I have made the case many times for why Columbus deserves to be celebrated, deserves to have his federal holiday, his statues, his cities named after him. And the case is pretty straightforward. Christopher Columbus was a very great man and one of the most consequential figures to ever live on planet Earth. He quite easily had more of an impact than every single one of his modern critics combined times 1,000. These are the people that we give holidays to, or used to. The people who shape the world. And say whatever else you want about Columbus, he did more than almost any other single person in history to shape the world we live in today. Now, it's often said by idiots who claim to be intellectually nuanced that if Columbus did achieve this world-shaping feat, he did it accidentally. Now, even if that's true, it wouldn't change his significance or the significance of what he accomplished, but it's not true. He may have been looking for the East Indies. In other words, he was looking for land he knew existed rather than looking for land he didn't know existed, so could not have been looking for by definition. But there was nothing accidental about his voyage. He didn't trip and fall and drift across the Atlantic. Rather, he led a small fleet of ships over an unknown ocean without the use of any modern navigational equipment, without even a map to guide the way. And you would think that this would be a rather impressive thing to modern people who can't manage to drive to the Starbucks 3 blocks away without the assistance of satellite navigation. But that would require modern people to have humility and perspective, both of which are in short supply. Now, over the course of his 4 voyages, Columbus discovered many Caribbean islands and explored the coasts of Central and South America. The full scope of what he had discovered would not be fully understood until after he died, but the fact remains that Columbus brought Western civilization across a vast and uncharted and dangerous sea and into a previously unexplored and unknown hemisphere of the globe. He forever changed the world, and he changed it in a way and to a degree matched by very few other people who have ever lived on the planet. And aside from Jesus Christ, exceeded by perhaps no one. He did this through his courage and his daring and his brilliance and his vision, all things worth admiring, and all virtues that Columbus possessed in far greater quantity than any of his smarmy, petty, non-contributing critics. Was Columbus a deeply flawed man? Could he be brutal and unjust? Yes. Welcome to almost any great man who has ever lived. Sure, Columbus captured slaves. He executed both Spaniards and Indians under his rule. He took gold. He was, by all accounts, a pretty bad governor. This was a common flaw of explorers of that era. Many of them were brilliant on their ships, but incompetent or downright horrible on solid ground. Magellan, for example, made it 3/4 of the way around the world before getting himself killed in a needless conflict with a tribe in the Philippines. There was a certain type of man who was needed to navigate a fleet of ships across uncharted waters. And there was a different kind of man oftentimes who was needed to manage settlements. Unfortunately, the latter type had no way of getting to the settlement except by hitching a ride with the former. And the former wasn't often willing to cede control of the land he had just gone through all that trouble of discovering, a somewhat understandable reluctance, I think. Now, there's nothing wrong with acknowledging the flaws of men like Christopher Columbus. Nobody is suggesting that we should honor them as perfect people or worship them as gods. The point of the statues and the monuments and the holidays, etc., is to remember and celebrate the indispensable role they played in establishing the civilization in which we all live now, a civilization that just so happens to be the freest and most prosperous in the history of the world. Columbus, through his navigational brilliance, boldness, courage, vision, and determination, is one of the men we have to thank for that, and we should thank him for that. Now, some people might claim that Western civilization is nothing to be thankful for at all. But I can't help but notice that those people still choose to live here, enjoying the comforts and freedoms given to them by the very men whose monuments they deface and holidays they cancel. They claim this is stolen land, yet they remain on it, basking in its luxuries. The fact is that they would much prefer to live in the colonized version of this land than the alternative. Most Indian tribes were about 5,000 to 6,000 years behind the more advanced civilizations on the other side of the ocean. So when those people, beginning with Columbus, came to the New World, they were going back in time by about 5,000 to 6,000 years. If those people on this side of the world were left to their own devices, by now they probably still wouldn't have even invented the wheel. That's how far behind they were. And that is not a world that any supposed opponent of colonization would want to live in, no matter what they say. Which brings us to the day that has come to replace Columbus Day. And now you'll hear most people in the mainstream talk about Indigenous Peoples Day. Joe Biden recognized Indigenous Peoples Day in a presidential proclamation for the first time 2 years ago. In many corners of American society, it has entirely supplanted Columbus Day. But Indigenous Peoples Day is a total farce and a disgrace and a joke for several reasons that I'll explain. First, it's not a real holiday. It is a political statement. It is a protest. It was a thing invented specifically to overshadow Columbus Day. Leftists don't understand why this is a problem because everything they do is reactive in this way. Their whole cultural agenda is designed to supplant, destroy, dismantle the old traditions and old values. They have no ideas of their own. They have nothing new or interesting to say. They just have a bunch of things they don't like and want to destroy for reasons they can barely articulate. People always say, happy dog, happy life. I know I'm saying that all the time. Every day I say it. It's my mantra in my house. Well, if that's really the case, you need to be giving your dog Rough Greens. Naturopathic Dr. Dennis Black, the founder of Rough Greens, is focused on improving the health of every dog in America. Before I started feeding my dog Rough Greens, I had no idea that dog food is dead food. It contains very little nutritional value. Think about it. Nutrition isn't brown, it's green. Let Rough Greens bring your dog's food back to life. Rough Greens is a supplement that contains all the necessary vitamins, minerals, probiotics, omega oils, digestive enzymes, and antioxidants that your dog needs. You don't have to go out and buy new dog food. You just sprinkle Rough Greens on their food every day. Dog owners everywhere are raving about Rough Greens. It supports healthy joints, improves bad breath, boosts energy levels, and so much more. We are what we eat, and that goes for dogs too. Naturopathic Dr. Dennis Black is so confident Rough Greens will improve your dog's health. He's offering my listeners a free Jumpstart trial bag so your dog can try it. A free Jumpstart trial bag that can be at your door in just a few business days. Go to roughgreens.com/Matt. or call 844-ROUGH-700. That's ruffgreens.com/Matt, or call 844-ROUGH-700 today. Columbus Day celebrates one of the greatest historical figures to ever live. Indigenous Peoples Day is a political tactic meant to undermine that same historical figure. So if you want a real holiday in order to celebrate Indigenous people, then get your own day. Okay, try for once to come up with one idea that isn't designed to simply be the opposite of someone else's idea. Think for yourselves for a change, you damned half-wit plagiarists. Second, the underlying premise of the day is false. This is supposedly a day to acknowledge the people whose land was stolen by European settlers, but the whole stolen land thing is preposterous. There were maybe as low as 1 or 2 million Indians living on the entire North American continent by the 15th century. At most, there were maybe 15 or 20 million. Okay? A wide range. We don't know exactly how many people were here, but either way, that's not a lot of people. And the point is that the vast, vast majority of the land was unoccupied. North America and Central and South America. These were mostly untamed, unexplored, uninhabited wildernesses. The smattering of tribes spread out across 9 million square miles in North America, they didn't own the whole thing. People these days talk as if the Europeans had no right to come here in the first place, which is an interesting assertion from open borders advocates, but that's obviously absurd on its face. The tide of civilizational expansion and progress was not going to be held back forever. And the idea that a ragtag collection of warring Stone Age tribes somehow laid eternal claim to this entire hemisphere is just insane. It is crazy. The land was destined to be conquered by more civilized and advanced people, and it was, and thank God it was. Third, the whole concept of indigenous people is arbitrary, if not totally nonsensical. Okay, like I think we should stop using indigenous and native to describe the group of people that it usually describes. What makes a person indigenous exactly? How long does their lineage have to be present here? Like, if I can trace my family back 100 years, is that not good enough? 200 years? 300 years? The absurd reality is that if you are a white person living in the United States of America and your ancestors arrived here on the Mayflower 400 years ago, you still somehow do not count as either native or indigenous. This is not your native land, even after 4 centuries. Okay, your family could have been here for 400 years building this society. And somehow, even after all that time, this is not your native land, you're told. So where is your native land exactly? If you are not indigenous to this place, the place where you were born, and your parents were born, and your grandparents were born, and your grandparents' grandparents' grandparents were born, then where are you indigenous? You know the answer from these people? The answer is nowhere. The cultural powers that be, they want you to consider yourself ancestrally homeless. You belong nowhere. You are a usurper and an invader no matter where you go. You have no native home, no matter how long your family has lived here. Now, nobody applies this standard to the so-called indigenous people. I always hear that they were the people who originated here. What do you mean originated here? What do you think they climbed out of the ground? You think they grew on trees? What do you mean originated here, you idiots? All of the so-called indigenous people, they all descend from people who came here at some point in the past and fought over the land and killed each other brutally for centuries to claim whatever slice of it they possessed before the white settlers arrived. And then those settlers did the same thing that the so-called indigenous people did. They fought for the land, and they won. They built a life for themselves through work and toil and hardship and blood. They won. Get over it. They won. And this is our land now. Yeah, we're supposed to live in a state of perpetual shame over this history? Hell no. I don't play that game. This is my home. I am native to this country. I originate here. It's where I was born. It's where my children were born. I belong here. I am proud of our history. I am proud of the men who built our civilization. I celebrate those men. I will continue to celebrate them. Were they colonizers? Sure they were. And I celebrate that too, okay? I celebrate the fact that they colonized this land. I am glad they did it. Because what they did is they forged into an unknown wilderness and they built a life for themselves, expanding Western civilization in the process. It was a virtuous act. And through it, they earned the right to call this place home, and for all of their descendants through the ages to do the same. That is why they get the holidays. They earn them. And it's also why, ultimately today, Indigenous Peoples Day, that ridiculous, fake disgrace of a holiday, is canceled. Hey, YouTube, thanks for listening to the show. If you'd like access to my full show with no ads, you should go to dailywire.com and use promo code Walsh to get 2 months free on all annual plans. See you there.